pointed out, the court apparently rejected this argument that this represented an unconstitutional religious discrimination. What did they mean by that?
They meant that they would not take into account what candidate Donald Trump said he would do when he was running for president. And the dissent said you cannot fail to take that into account because that's what his motivation is. So if his motivation is to keep people out because they are Muslim, that changes the court's analysis, and it requires the government to jump through a much higher bar in order to pass constitutional muster. But if the purpose of the proclamation is to, as the Chief Justice said, secure the nation's borders, further the president's ability to use congressional tools to keep people out, to force the countries from which they came to engage in better vetting for people leaving there, all of which are legitimate government roles, then the government's bar is a much lower bar. The dissenters said, wait a minute, he is so much a part of what he says, how can you overlook it? The majority says, if we keep looking at everything politicians say before they get into office in order to address the constitutionality of what they do when they're in office, there will be no end to our research into their words. So that's the divide that was confronted in this case today. And as Shannon reported, it was decided by just one vote.
Yeah, Justice Sotomayor was among those saying this reminds us of a decision we might regret, as you referred to the Japanese internment decision back in 1944, I believe.
Yes,
this was similar to that.
This was a the only way I can describe her dissent was, and I know her well, was a fierce dissent. She's passionate about these issues, and she's predicting that this opinion.
She's saying this was a bigoted decision.
Yes, she's saying it was a bigoted decision because this will rank with Korematsu, which is really one of what we call the dirty dozen, one of the 12 worst opinions in the history of the country, where the Supreme Court upheld the right of President Roosevelt to detain Japanese Americans without proving fault, just on the basis of their ancestry. The Chief Justice, this rarely happens, for the majority to address the dissent. The Chief Justice says, look, you used nice ruffles and flourishes. We all know how horrible the Korematsu decision was, but this case has nothing to do with Korematsu. This is not locking people up. This is just saying, go home until your country vets you better.
Did people buy that distinction? I know on the left, people are going to have one view. On the right, they're going to have another view. But
I don't think this case is a unified.
The fact that he went out of his way to say that in response to Sotomayor's argument, what did you make of that?
I think he was aware. The Chief Justice is very concerned about legacy and image. How will this opinion be viewed after he's no longer Chief Justice? I don't know if Justice Sotomayor's prediction will come to pass, but the Chief Justice was obviously concerned enough about it that he chose to address it in the majority opinion. It's a relatively narrow opinion, and as Shannon pointed out, this is an opinion on a preliminary injunction, meaning tell us what the law is while we try the case. So now it goes back to the trial court for people to say, okay, it's constitutional. Here's why it doesn't apply to me. So whoever wants to come in the country from into the U.S. or one of these countries, whether they enter here in Brooklyn or whether they enter in Honolulu, gets a chance to get a trial now. They can't challenge its constitutionality, but they have an opportunity to demonstrate to a trial court judge, a federal district court judge, why this ban doesn't apply to them. And as Shannon predicted, this is going to go on and on and on, and eventually we'll come back to the Supreme Court. But the president's executive order remains in play and is fully enforceable during the pendency of these trials.
Amazing. I actually kind of understand it. With the emphasis on kind of.
You are smarter than you give yourself credit for. I don't think Gasparino believes that.
No, he doesn't.
I know it to be so.
He's just jealous.
He's in Italy watching us now, and it's 10 o'clock.
He's at the Venetian Hotel. Who's he kidding? Judge, thank you very much. The judge has been like on every single show. I think he was, you name it, he's on it and explaining it to all of us. Let's get the read on this and the follow-up from conservative commentator Jenna Ellis, the Wall Street Journal's Shelby Holiday, Democratic strategist Michael Starr Hopkins. Michael, I'll begin with you because you have the view that this is one of those few decisions the Supreme Court, makes that it will regret, that it will have to come back and address, right?
I do. I think this is going to end up going down in the realm of the Dred Scott decision, like the judge said, in the realm of Korematsu. I think the court here failed to look at intent. I think now in this third iteration of the executive order, I think there are some legitimate arguments about the constitutionality of it. But I think here the court failed to look at what was the intent of the Trump administration. And when you look at the cake baker's case, there they did look at intent.
All right, that might be the case here, but they obviously separated candidate Trump from President Trump. Jenna, what do you make of that?
They did.
They did, and unlike what Michael says, intent here doesn't matter. It matters what the rule of law says you can and can't do. If we're playing a chess game here, it doesn't matter what your intent is. It matters, can you move the knight to a specific position or not according to the rules. So the political fallout here is going to be a free fall up for the Trump administration, because this was a win for the rule of law, for the Constitution, and for every American family. And because it was such a narrow vote, 5-4, and both in the travel ban decision and in the NIFLA case today, this is telling every American family who voted for President Trump that they made the right decision, because Justice Gorsuch is now on the bench. And at the James Dobson Family Institute, we hear from millions of families daily from our constituency and our network that talk about why families are important, why the rule of law is important, why their vote matters. And the Supreme Court today played by the rule of law, not by the politics.
All right, Shelby, looking at this, and we have this great immigration debate back and forth on the controversy over the separation of these kids from their parents at the border and then reuniting them. Does this move the needle there?
Well, I think politically this is an extremely important decision. Basically, for what you mentioned, yes, this is a huge wind in the president's sails. He sees this as a huge victory for the White House. It certainly reaffirms the president's power when it comes to issues of national security and immigration. It also just underscores the importance of elections. Elections have consequences. And this was an extremely close decision that was decided by a justice that the president himself picked. So it's likely to rile up the president's base. We also have 7 states going to the polls today in primaries. So it's unclear how it'll play out on the ground and how it could play out in midterms, but it's certainly seen as a victory, and the president can turn around, and he's already turning around and saying, hey, look, Democrats, I do have this power. I do have the authority to implement the rule of law and to crack down on illegal immigrants, to secure our borders. And he sees this as related to his policy on the southern border. So politically, yes, it will have consequences, and it is important for the president.
Michael, you see it just the opposite, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is, and I think Shelby's correct that the president believes that this is going to help him, but I think this is also going to get Democrats out to the polls in 2018 for the congressional elections, because now we're already hearing about Democratic groups coming together for protests over the weekend, not just now regarding immigration, but also regarding this Muslim ban. And so I think what we're going to see is Trump's going to feed his base, but this is going to be used by Democrats to also excite our base.
I don't know about that, Jen. I can't see a decision big and momentous as this is moving the political needle one way or the other, but what do you think?
I think it's going to move the political needle in terms of all of the people who voted for Trump in 2016 as kind of the lesser of two evils. This is going to reinforce that that was a right vote, and they're going to be actively supporting him. And even though Democrats, I mean, the only thing they can complain about is that the politics actually don't matter to the Supreme Court. And so if we're looking at the people who do care, this is going to help President Trump.
All right, guys, I want to thank you. I apologize for the abbreviated all the breaking news stuff as well. Good takes on all of this. Also,